We begin this news hour with the military coup in Sudan. The army chief has announced the dissolution of the transitional government and has declared a state of emergency. General Abdel Fattah Burhan vowed to hold elections as scheduled in 2023, but he says the country is in turmoil and the military has a constitutional duty to intervene. Protesters have turned out in large numbers against the coup, and there are reports that at least 2 people are dead and 80 more wounded. A number of ministers and civilian officials have been detained, including the Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok. He's been taken to an unknown location. Troops have blocked roads and bridges in the capital Khartoum. Internet and mobile phone signals are down. The airport is closed and the radio and television headquarters have been raided. It hasn't stopped thousands of people flooding the streets. Sudan's main pro-democracy group has called for a general strike and civilian resistance against the coup. Military and civilian leaders have been at odds since long-time ruler Omar al-Bashir was overthrown 2 years ago and the transitional government was set up.
And we are taking the steps that are preserving the path of the magnificent December revolution until its final goals are achieved in arriving at a completely civilian state through free and transparent elections. So in order to correct the path of the revolution, the following has been decided. Firstly, the declaration of a state of emergency in all areas of the country. And number 4, the dissolution of Transitional Sovereign Council and dismissal of its members. Number 5, the dissolution of the cabinet. Number 6, conclusion of the tenures of the provincial governors.
Well, the coup in Sudan has prompted growing international condemnation. The U.S. Embassy in Khartoum has called on all actors who are disrupting Sudan's transition to democracy to stand down. The U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, said he was deeply alarmed by the military takeover. Mr. Feltman had met military and civilian leaders in Khartoum on Sunday in a bid to resolve the dispute. And speaking on board Air Force One, the Deputy White House spokesperson, Karine Jean-Pierre, had this to say.
Has the President been briefed on the coup in Sudan, and what is his reaction to the events there today?
So the United States is deeply alarmed at reports of a military takeover at the transitional government. We reject the actions by the military and call for the immediate release of the Prime Minister and others who have been placed under house arrest. The actions today are in stark opposition to the will of the Sudanese people and their aspirations for peace, liberty, and justice. The United States continue to strongly support the Sudanese people's demand for a democratic transition in Sudan and will continue to evaluate how best to help the Sudanese people achieve this goal.
White House deputy spokeswoman there. Meanwhile, the European Union has called for the immediate release of the Prime Minister and other civilian leaders who've been detained. The bloc said the priority must be to stop Sudan sliding into violence and bloodshed.
EU is very concerned about Sudan's military forces reportedly putting Prime Minister Hamdok under house arrest, and as well as detaining other members of the civilian leadership, and we urge for their fast release. We have seen also the reports of cuts of telephone and internet in Sudan. We urgently call for unrestricted means of communication to reach those in need. Violence and bloodshed must be avoided at all costs.
Well, for more on the coup in Sudan, let's bring in Arise East Africa correspondent Mark Bicachi, who joins me from neighboring Kenya. Very good to see you, Mark. Fast-moving events in Sudan. Tell us what we know so far, the end of the civilian-military partnership, power-sharing arrangement effectively.
Yes, it is indeed the end of that particular partnership. This is an attempt by the military to succeed itself. Let's remember that the timing of this coup is just before the military was supposed to hand over the chairmanship of the council to the civilians. So this is definitely an attempt by the military to inherit itself, seeing as the military was the chief benefactor, the chief beneficiaries of the former regime were the military, and for them losing power is something that is unimaginable. A lot of the business and commerce has always been controlled by members of the military, and it is this control that they are hoping to keep and to extend.
But I mean, when we say members of the military, I understand that the military itself is factionalized. I mean, can we make out yet whether the military is, given that it's broken into factions from what I understand, whether this is perhaps coming from the faction that supported Omar al-Bashir or some other group?
Well, you know, the fact that the head of the military is the one who's conducted this particular coup, and remember there was another coup attempt almost a month ago. So right now, the faction that is there now is the faction that deposed Bashir, but remember, these were people who were quite close to Bashir. So when it comes to the unified agenda of members of the military, and if you look at the events, the demonstrations that were there before, ostensibly some argue organized by the military itself, to try and say that the military should take over, then you realize that there, in as much as there are factions within the military, the members of the military do feel that having one of them at the top is better, because the argument really is about whether Sudan should continue on to civilian rule or the military should continue to hold on to power. Because if you look at the arguments that are being given in terms of defending why the military has taken over, then you can see very clearly that the military is intent on keeping power.
So, I mean, what do you know about what's happening on the streets in Sudan today, Mark? We understand that pro-democracy protesters have been out in force demonstrating.
Yes, they've been out enforced by the thousands, according to some reports. Some reports say up to 3 of them have died, others say 2. But of course, one of the things that a lot of people who are analyzing the situation and members of the Horn Institute who have talked to personally say that this is going to be a drawn-out demonstration space. They don't see as if the people of Sudan will agree or take this coup lying down. How strongly the military wants to crack down on these protests, having stated a state of emergency and suspended parts of the constitution, remains to be seen. But the death of these 2 or 3 people and 80 other people injured is a clear sign that we could be seeing quite a bit of bloodshed in the twin cities, both Khartoum and the neighboring city, where we've seen a lot of Sudanese people pouring into the streets and fighting really for their right for self-determination, their right to vote, and universal suffrage and freedom.
And give us a sense of how the world is reacting to this coup in Sudan. I understand there's been strong words from the US, the EU, the UN, the Arab League, as well as the African Union.
Yes, it did. And it must be put into perspective that Sudan was well on the path as to normalizing ties with the United States, much of Europe and much of Africa, and a lot of diplomatic and economic ties were being reestablished. In doing this, the military is basically rolling back quite a lot of the progress they've made. They've received quite strong condemnation from the United States, from the European Union, but most importantly and most interestingly from the Arab League. If you listen to the speech of the military leader, you will hear he thanked one state in particular. It is known to be a pariah state. So there is a likelihood that the military junta here would be looking to base its support off of non-members of the Arabian League, and how that will affect how the UAE and other countries such as Saudi Arabia in the region treat Sudan is going to be very, very critical. And we could be seeing Sudan becoming once again a pariah state. And given the fact that it has food shortages, it has an economic inflation has hit the roof in the region, then you would expect that this could only mean more suffering for the people of Sudan as Sudan withdraws itself from the democratic course that it was on.
And Mark, we've got about a minute or so left. I wonder how you might characterize what's likely to happen next, because I mean the possibility of violence sounds really quite enormous, doesn't it, based on what we're seeing taking place today. Could this mark the beginning of a new civil war again in Sudan?
Well, the truth is, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, that yes, that is indeed the case that we expect. A lot of the protesters are not coming to protest without unweaponed, and we know that a lot of them have organized post the deposing of Bashir. So there is military and ammunition grade militants available for any side to use. So this could be the beginning of a civil war in Sudan. That is the plain reality. And let's not forget states like Ethiopia, and you know what's happening with the Renaissance Dam and the tensions that were between Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt and Ethiopia. So we know even regionally their interests to push this.
Mark, thanks ever so much. Mark Bicachi, Arise East Africa correspondent there, talking to me about the coup in Sudan from neighboring Kenya.